Great. So thank you everybody for being here, and hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this informative panel as part of the third annual Pierce County Affordable Housing Week. On behalf of the Tacoma-Pierce County Affordable Housing Consortium, I'd like to welcome you to today's panel. Today's panel is titled Housing with Support, What Works for Long-Term Stability. And today's virtual panel is sponsored by Pierce County Housing Authority, Parkview Services, Mercy Housing Northwest, Gordon Thomas Honeywell, and Pierce County Human Services. We'd also like to extend a special thank you to our housing champion, the Tacoma Housing Authority, for their support and with this week's events and celebration. So thank you all. And before we dive into it, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We gratefully honor and acknowledge that we rest on the traditional lands of the Puyallup people. The Puyallup people are still here today. They still live on their traditional lands and thrive in their community. This acknowledgement is a small step towards true allyship as we commit to uplifting Indigenous voices and reflecting on the history of dispossession. Let us remain dedicated to this cause of social justice for Indigenous populations. And this week marks the beginning of Pierce County Affordable Housing Week 2025, second day yesterday. If you joined us, thank you for coming back and joining us again. This year's theme emphasizes the range of housing options available, from emergency shelters to home ownership. It highlights various types of affordable housing, the community stakeholders involved, and the local needs for these housing options. Through these conversations, we challenge you to expand your understanding of what home means and recognize the diverse paths people take to get there. Through panels, tours, and community events, we're going to explore this week how to create Pierce County, a Pierce County where everyone has a safe and stable place to call home. And you can learn a little bit more about what's going on this week, the events, by joining our website. We have a page specifically for Affordable Housing Week, and we'll put that in the chat for you. And so a little setup for today's discussion. It's going to be a panel discussion, as you know. We're going to start by briefly introducing our incredible panelists and our topic for today. And then I'm going to give each of them a few minutes to discuss their role, their organization, and what they're seeing in their work, some insights that they have. And after everybody has had, our two panelists have had a moment to speak, we're going to open it up for discussion and questions. So keep your questions, and we'll have time for that after we've had some presentation. And quickly before we start this conversation, I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself and the organization that I'm representing today. My name is Casey Twiggs, and I'm thrilled to be your host. The Affordable Housing Consortium is a nonprofit membership-based organization that provides public education, advocacy, and support for the expansion of affordable housing throughout Pierce County. We do this by educating the public on the need for affordable housing, hosting virtual discussions like this one, and sharing information with the public on housing needs and local policy. We also advocate at the state and local levels for policies and funding to support the creation of more affordable housing, as well as bolster the work of our members. The consortium has about 75 dedicated members, ranging from housing developers to individual advocates. And our organization works tirelessly to foster communities where everyone has access to safe and affordable homes. So today's topic is focused on permanent supportive housing, PSH, and transitional housing. Permanent supportive housing provides long-term or time-limited housing paired with supportive services. These housing types primarily serve individuals earning 0 to 30 area median income, that's AMI as well, including people with disabilities, chronic health conditions, those exiting homelessness, and others. Supportive housing has proven to reduce public system costs and improve outcomes for vulnerable populations. Local developers and service providers such as Lehigh, Trouve's Healthcare Corporation, and Catholic Community Services, among others, operate these essential programs. And the demand for PSH units in Pierce County is estimated to require close to 19,500 units by 2044 and about 14,000 units for non-supportive housing units. So a little setup there, and we'll go into more detail with our panelists. Let me introduce them to you really quickly. Steve Oban is the VP of Strategy and Government Affairs for Trouve Healthcare Corporation. And our second panelist is Scott Schubert, Chief Executive Officer at Metropolitan Development Council. We are going to start with Steve. Steve, if you would like to talk a little bit more about yourself, your role, your organization, and what you're seeing in your work.
Love to. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Steve Oban, and for about the last 12 years, I've been working in the public policy space that we're talking about here today, both in state government and then for the county. Chiefly, I've worked on some new initiatives for mental health and for homelessness. And now I have the privilege of working, as Casey said, for Trouve Healthcare. The division I'm in is Trouve Housing. We opened St. Anne's 6 years ago, which is a 61 beds of PSH with robust on-site supports. About 85% of our residents have lived with us more than 3.5 years and counting. All of our residents have serious mental illness, including psychotic disorders, drug-seeking behavior with complex medical needs. Our residents range anywhere from their mid-20s to their mid-80s. They're placed with us by DSHS from state psych hospitals or from acute care facilities like St. Joe's or Good Sam or Wellfound. Here is the challenge as I see it. About 25% of our homeless population in Pierce County have some combination of complex mental health, drug-seeking behaviors, and medical issues. Their mortality rates are 25 to 30 years below the general population. Homeless women die earlier than homeless men, which inverts the mortality rates of the general population. Their adverse living conditions combined with the serious mental illnesses I mentioned, substance use, trauma, feelings of disaffiliation, that diminish their ability to manage their general medical and healthcare, medical and their mental healthcare needs. Among individuals with serious mental illness, homelessness is associated with higher rates of emergency room utilization. There was a recent study done by former Governor Senator Christian Gregoire and the Hospital Association, which estimates that homeless individuals cost the system about $1.2 billion in emergency room visits alone. This roughly describes about 1,000 individuals here in Pierce County, homeless folks who are suffering from mental illness or drug-seeking behavior with these complex medical needs. Estimated to be about 6,000 in King County, although I think that's they're undercounted. Our residents at Trouve, St. Anne's, come from across the state. In our view, we're serving the most vulnerable subset of our region's homeless population, which is easily the most underserved group of unstably housed individuals in our communities. This population is almost always referred to as the chronically homeless. HUD defines that term as a person who either is an unaccompanied homeless individual with a disabling condition who has been continuously homeless for a year or more, or an individual with a disabling condition who has had 4 episodes of homelessness in the past 3 years. Well, that definition squarely defines our residents. 99% of our residents are homeless. 99% are diagnosed with schizophrenic or schizoaffective disorder. 64% of our residents have co-occurring drug-seeking behavior. 60% have complex medical needs. Because of this population's permanent disabilities, they are unlikely to ever be able to live independently. They're always going to need some form of permanent housing with on-site services that are tailored to their particular behavioral health and medical needs. Our 85% retention rate, we think, is a powerful indicator that our residents consider St. Anne's their home. And that's largely because of the following on-site services. We have trained staff, a 1-to-6 ratio, who are really good at creating a home-like setting for our residents. We also have on-site primary medical care. We have on-site medication management, psychiatry, dental care, and podiatry. We even have a beautician who comes on site once a week. We have 24/7 nursing services, which includes diabetic care and behavioral health supports. We also provide transportation, certainly free to our residents to get any specialty medical care they need, 3 meals a day, snacks, and also regular on-site activities, as well as taking them off-site to the theater, to go bowling, celebrate birthdays and major holidays. So we really are trying to create, as much as we can, a home-like setting where people feel that they belong, they're cared for, and then their complex needs are met there at St. Anne's. Our funding comes entirely from DSHS and Medicaid. So that's why we're able to afford just barely the services that we provide. As probably this group knows, the State Growth Management Act and Tacoma and Pierce County's comp plans all call for more PSH, as Casey mentioned, to address the lack of housing for this challenging population. And Trouve is trying to expand in Tacoma and other parts of the state to meet what we believe is this urgent, vital need. And in my view, we need more of this type of PSH if we're really going to address those who are suffering from chronic homelessness. Again, here in Pierce County, about 1,000 and thousands more across the state. Thanks very much. And that's, I'll stop there and let Scott take it away and then answer any questions you may have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate it and appreciate your hard work statewide and then also in Pierce County. So I am Scott Schubert. I'm the CEO for Metropolitan Development Council. Just a little bit of history of MDC and what we do. So we're a community action agency that was founded over 60 years ago. We really focus on housing solutions. We focus on education solutions, help with low income heat assistance, and then we also do our behavioral health and SUD services, which include our detox services. So we serve about 13,000 Pierce County residents on any given year, primarily in our housing programs, our homeless programs, and also focused on our detox services. So at MDC, we really look at it from a holistic and complex needs that our clients are coming to us around. So we're looking at it, how do we help serve these individuals that are coming into our permanent supportive housing programs, not just in housing stability, but we're saying, how do we help you towards employment? How do we help you with your education goals? How do we help you with your recovery support that you may be looking at? Or even if you're curious about what recovery could look like for you, how do we help you kind of understand that better and get a better perspective of what life could look like if you do go to a recovery-based type program? So MDC has about 250 units that we own, operate, and provide services at. So what that means for us is those are our permanent supportive housing, our affordable housing units that are really focused on, as Steve mentioned, chronically homeless individuals as defined by HUD. One thing I will highlight that we've been really focused and thinking more about is youth and young adult housing in particular. When we talk about HUD's definition of chronically homeless, that's a really difficult one for youth and young adults to hit. And part of that is around the length of time experiencing homelessness. A lot of our youth and young adults are very kind of transient and then will also double up often. And so hitting some of those definitions are really difficult. So if you're 18-year-old that has just become homeless, and you are struggling with a lot of different co-occurring disorders, that's really challenging still to find permanent supportive housing in our community. So I wanted to address that as a sub population that at times gets left out of the conversation. That's Prior to being at MDC, my focus has been on youth and young adult homelessness. I was the executive director for the YMCA of Greater Seattle's housing and homeless programs. And so that was a huge focus of mine, is just ensuring equal access for people who are 18 to 24 that are experiencing this as well. So as Steve had mentioned, kind of thinking about the cost per unit and cost per client in comparison to entering into an emergency room or accessing some higher needs of supportive services. It's about $15,000 is the way that Pierce County budgeted it out in 2024 and 25 for per one person to transition to permanent housing. With the city of Tacoma, they recently have adopted new legislation that they're looking to add close to 60,000 new housing units by 2050, with 30% designated for extreme low income populations. So what we're seeing at MDC is we're seeing that a lot of people are needing these services. But in addition to these services, we really need to think about what other things are they needing in order to be successful. So yes, it's great to be able to have your house and your own place, but do you have a bed? A lot of times people get moved into housing and don't actually have furniture. So that's one thing that we're talking about, like how do we ensure that somebody feels like that they can have a place that they can call home. We talk about what it means to start talking about employment services, what it looks like if you're going to be there for a long time. So when we talk about permanent housing, we talk about this is your house, this is your place, this is your apartment, and how do we make it feel comfortable for you so that you want to stay. One thing that we do encounter often in our permanent supportive housing is some barriers around behaviors or tendencies to bring what was happening on the streets into the units. And so we really talk about what that looks like to be, living more in a permanent situation. For a lot of people, that is a difficult transition. And so we want to be able to talk with people about that. When I operated a place called Aloha Inn in Seattle, one thing that I had a resident that even though they had a bed and they had their own place, they still slept on the floor because that was comfortable to them. And so we kind of worked on a gradual process to get them to understand what it looks like and what it means to call this place your own home or your own place. And so we did these steps that would allow them to feel more comfortable there. And so we ended up getting there, but it did take up to 2 years for somebody to get really comfortable, living and staying there. So I want to acknowledge that as well. At MDC, we, like I mentioned, sometimes it's also having support around your energy assistance. So for a lot of people, they are one paycheck away from experiencing homelessness again. And so we want to make sure that any barriers that they may have, that they're given the tools in order to be successful. So what we've been really strategizing around is what are those tools, what are those life skills that people need in order to transition to their own place or their own space really successfully. One of the goals of MDC this next 3 to 5 years is we want to be able to provide services at close to 500 new affordable housing, permanent supportive housing units. So far, we've broken ground on 2 new projects. One that is that's in partnership with Mercy Housing, which is also a sponsor here. So Mercy Housing, we are developing with them, providing services for 14 units that are chronically homeless individuals and families over by TCC. It's going to be, I think, a total of 119 units across the whole thing, but MDC is going to be focusing on those 14 units, providing services. We also we broke ground with Southport on a new project that was 98 units in Tacoma. We hope to break ground on another project down in Frederickson, which will be another 200 plus units. We're also providing services at Market Street Apartments, which is senior living facility, and that's been really cool. We just had a celebration, just had a birthday party for someone who turned 100, and part of what we did is just really celebrated them turning 100. We had this local karate company that did expo for people and brought in some self-defense techniques for people. So that was really cool to kind of see that kind of come together. So really what we're focusing on is we're focusing on the transition piece from the streets to housing, which is really difficult for people, but we see it as a huge success once it happens. For transitional housing, we have some of the only transitional housing in all of Pierce County. So that's usually where people are able to stay up to 2 years, working towards more permanent housing outcomes. But that's something that's hasn't been a investment that Pierce County and City of Tacoma have made recently, really focusing on the permanent supportive housing model. But transitional housing is something that we see, especially for transition age youth and young adults, as a highly successful type program. Out in King County, they did bridge housing, which is you have transitional housing until we're able to get you into a rapid rehousing program. So we actually saw a huge number of successful outcomes through that program, also through the diversion and housing navigation program. So I think there's a lot of great opportunities here, and just wanted to highlight some of those for you all in this presentation. So thanks, Casey.
Thank you so much, Scott and Steve, for giving us that kind of a, if you're familiar with these organizations or whether you're not, we've got a good base to go from. And do we have any questions in the room right now? Jay, I see your message in the chat. I'm happy to read it aloud, unless you want to take yourself off of mute and say it yourself. It sounds like a personal experience type. So I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Thank you, Casey. I'm a lived experience advocate. I sit on the Permanent Supportive Housing Advisory Board, and a lot of the work I do is in people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And a lot of the things that we deal with is we have this subclass that is too capable to get through the processes of DSHS and be accepted as disabled and otherwise, but we are too incapable to manage to keep housing or stay stable or keep jobs. And so we become traumatized, have CPTSD, and then it's hard to approach any system with credulity that they're going to support, house, or help us. And then we become jumpers. We jump between people's houses or live in people's living rooms or deal with a subpar kind of abusive relationship so that we can not be on the street and have some sense of home. Like I've been stable for 10 years, but I still live in my living room because I live with my ex. And so these situations are tolerable for a long period of time, but we need another access point like Tacid or other community access points that aren't service based so that we can get people like me that are burnt out and no longer trusting of services.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jay, for sharing and really have serving with you on the COC, have learned a lot from you, and really respect your perspective and what you bring, and agree. Like I think that for some people, permanent supportive housing is really challenging and hard and difficult, and there are circumstances that we as providers aren't fully aware of. What I've been really thinking about, just from my perspective, is, how do we still provide services or these opportunities for people to explore what it would look like to be ready for a job, or training around it, like employment services, or people who may be interested in education, but it also feels very difficult, and they've tried it before and it hasn't worked for them. So I've been really talking about this with other providers around what would it look like to have more, because we offer, in a lot of our permanent supportive housing, we offer 24-hour access or support. And that's been really incredible for some people who need that. For other people, they don't need that 24-hour piece. And from like a provider, what's difficult, honestly, is for us to keep staff in those programs or engaged in those programs. So we've really been talking about, like, how do we utilize some technology to be able to give people access to some of these services where you don't have to meet with a case manager. You don't have, at a certain time or a certain hour, but how can you still get the resources or feel comfortable, with new technology or developing and enhancing technology. So like we're actually going to be launching we're calling it like a life skills bundle, which allows you to, in the comfort of your home, be able to do some job preparation, budgeting, get resources that you need. So then if you want to meet with your case manager, you can, but if you're also like, the stigma of meeting with your case manager is too much, then you can utilize this technology. And so I know it's not necessarily for everyone, but what we want to try to do is see, does this technology allow us to connect with people on a different level than we normally would in case management support? So maybe they're going through an abusive situation. They don't want to see their case manager, but they still need access to these resources. How do we make that still accessible to them, so that they're getting their needs met? So that's a couple things that we're exploring too within permanent supportive housing.
Thank you.
Thank you for your your statements and what you're doing, Jay. Appreciate what you're doing out there too. And yeah, I think that there's a lot of gaps, but I think as these services continue to be funded, and the state's behind this kind of work, so hopefully, I guess I want to get into a little bit of the funding question now. That's a lot on my mind in terms of housing services, homeless services specifically. And I think a lot of people might be kind of a little afraid of the longevity of those services, because of funding. I know the state's behind us, but is there, and I don't know if Steve or Scott can speak to this more, but I guess I'm wondering, you know, are there potential risks based on what's going on at the federal level? Is that what you guys are y'all talking about that in your organizations? What's the landscape there?
Well, I'll go first, but Scott will probably have more experienced answer. So we're a unique form of PSH, and from a supportive housing, in that our residents, as I mentioned earlier, probably the most vulnerable, with the most complex needs of the homeless population. And our funding comes entirely through DSHS from Medicaid, which I'm sure, as your viewers know, is a combination of state and federal funding. And whether that's going to be curtailed at the federal level, who knows? I've heard varying reports from the majority there. We'll see. But the costs of not providing this kind of permanent supportive housing are enormous to the system. As I mentioned, over $1 billion a year, just in emergency room overutilization by this subpopulation. So it behooves the state and the federal government, for that matter, to continue to fund this form and all forms, in my view, of PSH, because without it, we're going to pay enormous costs just in dollars, not to mention the lack of the loss of human potential, and the impact it has on law enforcement, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for us, we are heavily reliant on public funds. So, we have our permanent supportive housing funded through the COC funds, through the HHP funds, which are through housing and homeless programs through Pierce County. We have City of Tacoma funds. So a lot of what we do is really focused in braiding of the funds. So it's not just this one fund covers this person or this whole program, because what's going to happen is if you anticipate just one funding stream, if that funding stream goes away, then what happens to the program as a whole? And so we've been, really over the last 2 years, really focusing on braiding a lot of our funding together. And that's kind of been our philosophy. So we have, through Department of Commerce, there's operation and maintenance support of programming funds, so LMS funds. There is, city and county funds that you can apply for and be eligible for. So I think there's, different ways of us doing it. And then what we've tried to do too is weave in our foundations of community support into those programs. So for those of you who may not be familiar, foundations of community support is a way that you can leverage Medicaid funding to be able to pay for some of the services, the case management, the housing stability services that you have. And so instead of it's a fee for service model. So instead of you would get, X number of dollars to support, this many clients or this many staff members, what you're doing is you're charging for each individual session that you have with that individual. So it's been something that we've been really kind of leveraging and trying to make sure that money also can feed back into our program, so that we can, ensure that people are getting the services that they need. But I do think that the next several years are going to be really challenging for housing providers in particular. And so just being aware of that. But it's not something, in the midst of uncertainty and, at times unknowns, that also provides a lot of opportunity. So like what we've done is we've said, okay, we have this workforce grant. Can we embed this person into some of our permanent supportive housing programs so that we can offer workforce development? Or we have a mental health counselor that goes to different sites. And so they're not just at one particular site, but they're at several of our sites. So I think there's some ways that you could get really creative with thinking about your funding, and always open to, like, if anyone's ever interested in just like brainstorming or coming up with ideas, always happy to just sit down and brainstorm with you based off of what, my knowledge of the different braided funds, and see if we can, help you in any way too.
That's wonderful. And if anybody in the room has thoughts or questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat, or you can use the raise your hand feature, or just take yourself off mute and interrupt me while I'm asking questions too, because I would love for you guys to engage with our panelists. But I do have some other questions. So I have a question about, we did talk about it, Scott, you did talk about transitional housing kind of versus, not versus, but a little bit of the differences between PSH. Could you go into that a little bit more? And really, what really are those differences, and what is MDC doing with their residents?
Yeah, so our transitional housing is a little unique. So traditionally, transitional housing is usually up to 2 years for an individual or a family. So if somebody is in transitional housing, they kind of have a deadline or a time frame of how long that they can stay there. And then based off of that, we work over the next, 1 to 2 years to help them find different housing or ways that they can save up during that time to afford their own housing. So at times we actually partner with some of the housing authorities for something called a move-on voucher, which is ability to get a voucher after they've completed their transitional housing experience. And so then they're set for success, beyond transitional housing. I would say like a challenge with that is anytime you feel like your back is against the wall, it creates this sense of intensity and this sense of panic at times. So even if you're like, I have 2 years, sometimes the panic sets in of like, well, what if I can't find anything? Or what if I, can't do, X, Y, and Z? And sometimes that's a good challenge for people, and other times that's almost too much for them, where then they're feeling overwhelmed. And so what we try to do is really focus on, talking about what transition looks like from the very beginning. For permanent supportive housing, there's traditionally no time frame associated with it. So you can stay as long as you need. And I think, what Steve was kind of highlighting is some of the people that are needing permanent supportive housing ongoing and continuous. And then I think sometimes people are in permanent supportive housing and they may not need permanent supportive housing ongoing. So we try to also identify those individuals that kind of have figured it out or are able to not depend on permanent supportive housing. So especially with our young adults in particular, that we have something called the Avenue Apartments, and so it feels like a dorm feel. And so we talk about transition right away so that they know, like, hey, this is an opportunity for you to kind of get on your feet. So we talk about it more like a transitional housing model, but if they need year 3 or 4, they can be there as well. So that's kind of some of the differences that we see.
Thank you. And that was kind of leading into, oh, Scott or Steve, did you have something to
Yeah,
add
I
on to
just,
that?
I,
Put yourself on.
yeah, I just wanted to supplement, and Scott said it very well. The permanent side of the permanent supportive housing piece is probably going to look a little bit differently based upon the population you're talking about. In our case, folks who've been on the street for 5+ years, undergone the kind of trauma, drug use and mental illness that unfortunately is a consequence of that really rough sleeping, that rough lifestyle. The studies I've read show that if you've been on the street in those conditions for over 5 years, it's going to be very difficult for someone in their 40s, certainly 50s and older, to be housed and to then help them get to a road of independence and live, in their own housing and one day be able to afford, their own rent and room board. So the category of PSH that we provide is really for that population that through diagnoses, it's clear objectively they are not able to live independently on their own. And so unless we provide this form of PSH, these folks are likely to go through the revolving door of our system, back on the street, through emergency rooms or jail or transitional housing or shelter, and then start all over again. So we have to have the right PSH that deals with this. I'll call it, the chronically homeless who've been on the street for 5+ years.
Great. Yeah, that was a great addition to kind of explain the difference and the importance of the permanent, the word permanent. Thank you for that. And so I did have another kind of question about the continuum. And Scott mentioned this where you have partnerships with housing authorities. We've got a couple people on this call that represent housing authorities, Pierce County Housing Authority and Tacoma Housing Authority, locally here, and which both do really great work. I'm wondering what other aspects of the continuum are you guys touching? Are you guys, are you working with other rental agencies, other avenues for the next step in the continuum for people in their housing journey? And if that doesn't make sense, I can reframe the question.
No, I'll start because I'm gonna have the shorter answer than maybe Scott. And that is that we're probably on that continuum, we're probably at, at that, as I've described, at that sort of permanent end of that continuum. Now we're working with local hospital social workers, we're working with the behavioral health provider community. When we had a crisis stabilization facility in Parkland, which I'm very familiar with, 66% of our clients came from chronic homelessness because they didn't have a stable place to live. They couldn't get on-site medical and behavioral health services. So they're using a system not designed for them. So we're on that, that one end, I guess, of that continuum, and Scott probably can speak to the middle and maybe the other end of that continuum.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So for MDC, we kind of look at it from people who are experiencing homelessness to permanent supportive housing and beyond. So some of the things that we're really focused on is kind of even just that initial outreach, connection point, shelter. So we're again really focused on youth and young adults in our community. So we have a contract right now with the Beacon shelter for youth and young adults. So we will see them there and then help them kind of work their way up to permanent supportive housing. In our community, it's kind of, you have a couple different decision points. So like, do you want to be diverted from the system? Do you want to be connected with permanent supportive housing in the homeless system, or rapid rehousing in the system? And so those are kind of some of the decision points that clients do have. So for some of them, they may decide, hey, I actually want to do diversion funds, and that makes more sense for me because I may have a stable job. I just, there were circumstances that, precluded me from getting my own place. I mean, rent right now, if you're doing first and last month's rent, that's easy, $5,000-$6,000, which could take people on a fixed income a lot of time to be able to support saving up that amount of dollars. It probably is even more, now too. So I think there's some opportunities to kind of do those quick divert from the system kind of interventions. For other people, they need that more long-term stability. So they had a situation that precluded them from staying in stable housing before. And so a permanent supportive housing option may be more appropriate for them. And so really, when we talk about the early intervention, we're trying to figure out what's the best type of service for individuals. And so they may be offered rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing, depending on that. I would say a majority of the people that we serve are on fixed incomes, so usually Social Security payments. And so what we see is a lot of people, they can't afford to live in anything but permanent supportive housing. And so I think that's something that we're seeing a trend more and more, and we will continue to see that trend kind of highlight. I've been hearing more and more about the next generation that around their retirement and how much they have not been able to save. And so I think we're going to be seeing this even more and more, people needing the permanent supportive housing because of being on a fixed income. So I think that's a trend that we should be talking about now versus talking about 10 years from now when those people are entering our homeless system. So I think we need to also be thinking upstream a little bit more as a organization and as a system of things that we're going to be seeing take place.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, and I think that it's really important what you said about the individual, catering their services to an individual rather than a blanket, program for everybody. And to that point, we're talking about this week the continuum. And what we're referring to the continuum is, you know, from homelessness to shelter to rental to home ownership. But that's not everyone's end goal. Home ownership may not be attainable, or maybe may not even be someone's actual goal for their housing. And so I think it's important for within these conversations to realize what um what someone's actual goals are, rather than assuming. And you guys are right in the middle of getting people to where they're trying to get to, and uh just really appreciative that you guys are here doing the work that you're doing. And I appreciate you guys for being here to kind of shed some light on what you do and how you kind of do it. So thank you. Do we have other questions in the room before we start to wrap up? Or you can throw them in the chat. If you want to connect with Scott or Steve, I'm sure they'd be happy to share their emails with you as well. And I'm going to share mine with you as well. Yeah, so what projects do you have coming up? Yeah, Steve or Scott, if you guys want to talk about any upcoming projects you've got going on.
Go first, and I can go.
Do you say, go first, Steve? I can go, or you can. Okay.
Oh, you go for it. You
okay.
go.
Yeah, so really what we're at MDC, we're kind of pivoting a little bit. One thing that we've realized is that owning, operating, and providing services at affordable housing is at times overwhelming, especially for a nonprofit organization. So we are really shifting to just, providing services, partnering with people who are really, really good at building the affordable housing and maintaining that. And so that's kind of been our pivot. And when I talked about some of the projects, we're not actually owning those projects. We're actually, providing services there. And so what we found is that affordable housing providers can actually build these projects a lot quicker and have a different source of capital than what we maybe have access to. And so we're really supporting some of those new projects being built. So like I said, we just opened up a project down Spanaway called Copper Way. That was a project with Inland Group. So that's 256 units. And then we have the two projects that just broke ground that will be opening up in probably summer of 2026. So look out for that. And then we have the Frederickson project, which we hope will be probably end of 2026. And so those are some of the projects that we're really focused on, is just supporting the affordable housing builders so that they can do their work really well, and then we could be the experts in the services.
Great,
Great to
thank you.
hear, Scott. Great leadership there from the DC. In our case, I mentioned St. Anne's, which we call it that because we bought a convent from a group of nuns, and we just have kept the name. We're a for-profit company. And we are expanding next to it an additional 100 units and then another 100. So basically, we have plans, property, and in the next 24 months, hopefully to stand up 100 to 200 additional units here in Pierce County. We also have we're in the process of purchasing a facility in Yakima because the state has asked us to expand our services eastward, where we're purchasing a shuttered hospital that's actually in really good shape, where we'll open 115 beds probably within the next 6 to 8 months. Because those are our projects. We're also looking at other regions in the state, but those are here in Pierce County and Yakima are our two most pressing projects that will come online in the next 24 months.
Wonderful. You guys both have a lot going on. And I appreciate you guys for the work that you're doing and being here today to share that work with us and educate us on a little bit deeper of what you guys do. And if you can see the chat, we've got their emails in there. So feel free to reach out to them with lingering questions or to connect or offer your services. But that is going to bring us to the end of today's panel. Yeah, I hope that you guys will continue to engage with these topics, engage with these organizations and these professionals doing this amazing work. A huge thank you to our honored guests again. And your expertise and dedication is clear, and we appreciate you. We hope that you'll continue to discuss in these panels with us throughout the week. We've got other panels every day at the same time from noon to 1. Next up on the list is about rental housing. That's tomorrow. And then on Thursday evening at 6 p.m., we do have a reception and kind of a big celebration for Affordable Housing Week. So come and eat and drink and be merry. Maybe grab a bottle of wine or whatever and help support us. But we would love to see you there. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. I'm going to put our email in the chat as well, so you can reach out to us if you want to. And you can find these recordings on our YouTube channel, and I'll put that in the chat as well. And 1 second, there we go. Give you a second to copy and paste those if you need them. But yeah, thank you guys, everybody, for being here, engaging with these conversations, these topics. And we're going to be back tomorrow for another panel discussion. And enjoy the rest of your sunny Tuesday. It's nice and warm out there. If you've got the time, I'd suggest go putting your feet in the sun. Thanks, everybody.